This is the Morning Goods with Madeline Woods on News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power. And now we're on to another subject just blew my mind when I first heard about it. So my guest now is Bret Kugelmass. He is the managing director of the Energy Impact Center here in Washington, D.C. And Bret is working on new technology or new practices that will combat the climate crisis with nuclear power. And I'm like, Bret, this is such a disconnect. You're gonna have to walk me through this. So first of all, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. And tell me, how is that even gonna work? Nuclear plants and nuclear energy is gonna wipe out the climate crisis?
Madeline, thanks for having me. Yeah, no, I'm happy to discuss. So climate change, what is it, right? We've got all these emissions coming into the air from different sources. And some of that is electricity. And so people think, okay, well, we need to decarbonize the electricity sector. But the emissions are coming from much more than that. It's coming from building heat, it's coming from industrial processes, it's coming from the transportation sector. And so while we think of renewables as the solution to climate change, we actually need a lot more than that. And nuclear is a direct substitute for fossil fuels across heat, across industrial processes, across electricity.
Okay.
And if it's cheap enough, it can be used to make carbon neutral fuels for transportation as well.
But Bret, you gotta help us, because when we think about nuclear energy, we think about explosions and bombs and wiping out civilization. So there's a way to control it and keep it clean like that?
Yeah, so some people think about nuclear energy as it relates to nuclear weapons, but there's a big disconnect there.
Okay.
So nuclear energy, right, the force that you can capture from inside of an atom instead of chemical energy, the force that it sits in between atoms, is far more powerful on a per unit mass basis, right? So if I have a pound of material, I can get 3 million times as much energy out of it if it's nuclear fuel as opposed to chemical fuel. So that's why people sometimes confuse the weapon side with the energy side. But we learned how to harness it for energy 7 decades ago.
Okay.
And it's a very, very different process.
So if we're using it for energy purposes already, like in what would I recognize that we're using nuclear energy for?
Well, most of the electricity that powers the studio right here is nuclear energy, right? We've got the Calvert Cliffs plant just maybe 40 miles out offside on the coast in the bay, in the Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
And 20% of all electricity across the country is nuclear energy. 10% of electricity in the world is nuclear energy.
Oh my gosh. So our energy isn't just coming from the big dams, because that always, I guess generated energy. And then those big fan looking things out in the big fields with the, those spinning.
Yeah, the wind turbines,
The wind turbines.
Yeah.
So that's not electricity anymore. It's coming from nuclear transmissions.
Well, those are electricity too. Dams is very old technology.
Yeah.
Nuclear has been around for a while. And the turbines, while they are very impressive, actually only comprise a very small amount of our electricity.
You're blowing my mind. You really are. You really are blowing my mind, because I can't get past nuclear weapons. So when you harness this nuclear energy, is there any exposure for radiation? Is there any exposure for cancer, I guess permeate our societies?
So a long time ago, we kind of fell under this assumption that, radiation is bad, but you're radioactive, I'm radioactive, the world that we live in is radioactive.
Okay.
You need a certain amount of radiation in order to cause cancer. Now, that did happen, let's say, at the Chernobyl explosion, which was a graphite reactor, but most nuclear power plants are actually water reactors. And water reactors don't explode. They melt down if everything goes wrong. And a meltdown just isn't that bad. It's not like graphite that can catch on fire and spread the radiation into the environment.
Right.
When a water-based plant melts down, as we saw in Fukushima in 2011, it just melts down and nobody got hurt.
Oh, I have so many questions about that. So many questions about that, but I'm going to stay on script here. So first of all, talk to me about what the Energy Impact Center is. What do you guys do over there?
Yes, the Energy Impact Center is a nonprofit I set up to explore deep decarbonization. How do we not only reduce our carbon footprint across all these sectors that we mentioned before, but even address our legacy emissions as well. That's the only way that we're going to be able to really fight climate change. And early on, we just saw how powerful nuclear could be as a tool to do this. And so we did a deep dive over these last 2 years into the economics, into the cost drivers, into what's holding back the nuclear industry. And what we've been able to present just as of last week, that's the big news, is the OPEN100 project.
Okay, so what's that?
The OPEN100 project is our template for new nuclear development.
Okay.
It's to say, hey, over the last 50 years, costs for nuclear got out of control. The plans just got too big, too cumbersome, too complex. And this is our attempt to take the whole industry and say, listen, if you guys march down this path, instead of the path that you have been marching down, you can make nuclear inexpensive again. We can bring clean energy to the entire world.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So obviously we have a major need for this because of the climate crisis that we find ourselves in right now. Let's talk about the what's been the recent impact of climate change in our world.
Yeah. Well, I hate to tell people things, but things are just going to start getting worse.
Yeah.
So we've put all this carbon up in the air, right? And that carbon in the air captures extra heat. This is what's causing climate change, the melting of the glaciers, the rising of the oceans, the increase in average temperature. But we've already gone from 300 parts per million CO2 in the air to 400 parts per million. And so I'm about to get scientific here. Okay. But that means that we've got a net radiative forcing, a net addition of heat of 3 watts per square meter.
So the world, the Earth is hotter.
Not only is it hotter, it's going to keep getting hotter. Yeah. Even if we were to cease all new emissions, we're going to still be adding heat to the air from all the emissions that we've already put up over the last 200 years. Okay. So it's a much bigger problem than most people are even talking about.
I bet that just blows your mind when you hear Trump and the administration saying, climate crisis, no such thing. We're good. We're good. Or how do you feel when you hear things like that?
Well, I think both sides are actually kind of putting their heads in the sand when it comes to how bad the problem is going to be and what the appropriate set of solutions are to fix it.
Yeah. Okay, so you talk about nuclear energy being one solution. Is there anything else we can do? Is there anything about consumption or usage that we need to be aware of?
I actually don't. I have a counter narrative on this.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that the individual really can do anything to solve this problem because we do have to account for those legacy emissions as well. So what we really need is massive scale negative emissions. We need to pull the CO2 out of the air, all the CO2 that we already put in the air. Yeah. Just remember, that's what's causing heating. So the key enabling technology for this is going to be what they call direct air capture.
Okay, and I bet you know exactly how to do that, don't you?
Well, I don't, but there are plenty of other great experts out there who do. People at, Global Thermostat, people at Carbon Engineering, there's some amazing companies out there. Okay. But those systems need to be powered by something that's incredibly abundant and incredibly low carbon.
And that's where nuclear energy comes in. Let's talk about it more. This is The Morning Goods with Madeline Will. It's on News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power. And today, we are covering some information that makes me a little nervous, makes me a little fascinated. We're talking with Bret Kugelmass he's the managing director of the Energy Impact Center. And Bret has a new theory that we can kind of cleanse the climate crisis or cleanse the climate in our Earth's environment, atmosphere, with clean nuclear energy from a new power plant that's coming out. So, I even took a minute to try to get it out so I said it correctly. And we have the phone lines open and the text lines open. And I just got a text that said, people should take care of each other and Mother Earth will take care of itself. We don't really need to worry about this climate crisis that's out there. And what's your response to something like that?
Well, listen, the Earth will take care of itself over a period of, let's say, 3 million years. Okay. So that's how long it took to get out of, one of the last extinction events. The Earth is able to rebound with new life, but it takes a long time. It takes these geologic time scales. Yeah. The problem with the thinking that, hey, if we just, cut down on our carbon emissions, if we just cut down on our pollution, kind of like, remember when we were polluting the ozone layer, right? And then all we had to do was stop with those
aerosol spray cans and stuff. Yeah.
So that was because the ozone is self-healing in a realistic time frame. Okay. The problem is atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide are not self-healing in a realistic time frame. You're talking about thousands of years in order for the carbon that we've already put in to be pulled back into the earth through natural processes. And this makes sense. Think about it. All that coal that we've been digging out of the ground, all the oil that we've been digging out of the ground, it took the earth millions of years to compress biological material and shove it under the ground to begin with. That's millions of years of natural processes to put it under the ground. And we've undone that in just a couple hundred years. Yeah. So this isn't something that we can just let natural processes take care of. We use technology to create the problem. We need technology to fix it.
I get this idea of we're going to create this nuclear power plant that's going to vacuum out all the carbon emissions and things like that. Is that really how it's supposed to work?
I think that's the only way that it can work.
But what it's the technology. How does that do it? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got energy. Are you just shooting it up and just blowing up the negative energy up there?
Well,
The heat and-
there are companies out there that are developing these set of technologies called direct air capture.
Mhm.
And what they're doing is they're running fans, and these fans take a lot of energy
Mhm.
across chemical solvents that can pull out the things that we don't like. Think of it like an air purifier
Okay.
for the atmosphere.
Gotcha.
But the problem is these systems take a lot of energy.
Mhm.
And if that energy, and by the way, every energy has a carbon footprint, even it's
Mm-hmm.
low. So solar panels, wind turbines, even nuclear power
Yeah.
has a carbon footprint.
Mhm.
The key is that you have to make it so low that when you consume that energy to then pull carbon out of the air, that the
Mhm.
math actually works and you can actually go net negative. Nuclear power is the only one that can do that.
Really?
Yes.
Because I'm thinking, okay, so it's going to take more energy, more nuclear energy to operate these new plants to be able to vacuum out and suck out all the bad stuff in our environment or in our climate. But then I'm thinking, okay, so that means that this new energy is now putting more radiation out there, is putting more exposure for us as humans to this radiation. And radiation works with a cumulative level where it causes cancer and things like this.
Well,
So-
nuclear power plants actually don't release radiation into the atmosphere
Mhm.
during their normal processes.
Okay.
That's in the rare case that something goes wrong. And
Mhm.
even so, it's so small compared to the natural amounts of radiation that the Earth is already creating itself. So watch this. I'm going to breathe.
Okay.
I just released 1.2 billion radioactive carbon-14
Well,
atoms.
keep that over there. No, I'm just
So
joking.
that's natural. You see, the sun, as it interacts with our atmosphere,
Yeah.
creates natural radiation all the time.
Exactly.
This is the same type of stuff that nuclear power plants create too, except the great thing about nuclear power plants is that they keep it all in one spot. They don't release it out into the environment.
So what has been the response? Because I got a million questions when you floated this idea to, I don't know, whoever your funders or investors are, and does it have to be something that's regulated by the government? What has been the response so far?
Definitely. And nuclear power has had a long history and tradition of going through licensing processes
Mhm.
where the government gets involved and says, okay, this is a good idea, this is not a good idea, here's license to do this, here's license to do that. But the government does this for all sorts of things, right? Like you get a driver's license
Right.
before you're allowed to drive.
Mhm.
And so it's just one of those processes that you have to go through. And once you get your permit, you can go ahead and build a nuclear power plant.
So far, it's been greenlit all the way.
So right now, the project that we're proposing, the
Mhm.
OPEN100 project, was just launched last week. It's in the earliest stages of conception. And one of the great things about it is that we are open sourcing it. So regulators and entrepreneurs and innovators and developers and constructors around the world can
Mhm.
use this information to bring inexpensive nuclear to fruition.
Okay, I got it. Now, if we don't do anything, if we do nothing, what is our climate, the future of our climate going to look like?
If we do absolutely nothing, things are going to get hotter and hotter. Weather events are going to get more and more extreme, and the ocean levels will rise. Now, that all sounds bad,
Yeah.
but you know what? Humanity is also growing by leaps and bounds as well. And so we do have to be careful. We have to be careful that the actions that we take for climate change aren't worse than the problems that climate change will create. And the problems are going to be bad, don't get me wrong, but we also have to consider that economic growth, prosperity, giving energy to people is also a good thing,
Mhm.
right? In the rich world, we're going to be fine no matter what. Things will get bad for the planet, but the rich world will be fine. What we have to think about is the poor. And the poor, especially the energy poor,
Mhm.
probably the best thing that you can do for them to give them that prosperity is get them cheap energy.
Mhm.
So I always like to say there is no solution to climate change without cheap energy, because people around the world, the poorest, are going to always elect for cheap energy over anything else.
Wow. Okay. So you are making the announcement that this is a plan. You're looking for investors. You're looking for funding in this one.
We're not looking for investors.
Okay.
We've already got some investment for some of our projects.
Okay.
And the OPEN100 project has been sponsored by the Energy Impact Center
Oh,
already.
okay, fantastic. So when will it be complete?
So it's going to be an ongoing process, just like an open source operating system.
Uh-huh.
Let's say Linux, the foundation for Apple computers, the foundation for Microsoft. This is going to be an open source project
Mhm.
that is constantly iterative and constantly improved by the world. by scientific institutions involved in nuclear energy.
I guess my question is, where's the first plant going to be?
That's a great question.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that we're doing is we are going around the world, meeting with governments, meeting with regulators to show them, hey, here's a way that you can bring cheap energy to your people. And we'll see where it ends up going first.
So it won't be here in America. It might be here in America. It could be anywhere in the world.
We think that it'll be outside the US first.
Okay.
Listen, the US is amazing for innovation, but we actually don't have increasing energy demand. And when you talk about energy innovation, it's going to be in a place where they're dying for more energy.
Oh my gosh, Bret, I'm not done with you. I want to thank you so much for coming in. Listen, if people want more information, how can they follow you, or is there a website where they can go and do more reading about the Energy Impact Center?
Yeah.
And what is it called? Project 100?
OPEN100. So you can go to open-100.com to learn about that project, energyimpactcenter.org to learn about our organization, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to learn what I'm doing as well. Bret Kugelmass, BRET, KUGELMASS on LinkedIn.
That's fantastic. You covered everything for me. Thank you, Bret.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I got my fingers crossed that you're doing the right thing and that we're all going to be okay.